time to draft Gatecrash. We have Undercity Plague as the rare, which is nice but very expensive. I think the best cards in this pack are the 2-drops with Syndic of Tithes, Burning Tree Emissary, Cartel Aristocrat, and Scanner Legionnaire. Not a 2-drop, but it has haste, which makes it very good for burrows. Going with a 1-colored card here in Syndic of Tithes is probably the most promising. I think it works very well in Orzhov and Boros, and yeah, you can't really go wrong with first picking Syndic of Tithes, although I could see picking any of the 2-drops really, especially Burning Tree Emissary, which has made waves in Constructed, is very, very good on turn 2. Of course, this card has more utility later on in the game. We are getting past Gorklan Rampager, which means that Gruul is potentially open. This is one of the best uncommons in the set. The rare is missing, so we can't deduce too much. The other cards are much weaker than the Rampager. Cloudfin Raptor is okay, Death Cult Rogue, Skinbank Goblin, Assault Griffin, all fine commons, but nothing too exciting. Also, Rampager is sufficiently more powerful than any of the Orzhov or Boros cards we see here, and it's definitely correct to go with a signal and then go from there. Here we see 5-Alarm Fire, Miming, Slam, and Gruul Keyrune, all potentially playable in Gruul. 5-Alarm Fire and Boros, of course, as well. I'm not the biggest fan of those 3-mana cards because their impact on turn 3 is minimal, and that's very dangerous in this format. However, this pack is rather weak overall. I don't like most of the cards. Executioner's Swing is fine, and those cards here, the uncommons and rares, are all playable, but not too exciting, to be honest. I just don't like to draft these cards early before I know where I'm going. I think that Executioner's Swing is probably the pick here, simply because it looks like the most powerful card, and the alternative would probably be picking 5-Alarm Fire with the option to make a deck that's almost exclusively creatures and 5-Alarm Fire, which would allow us to build around the enchantment in a meaningful way. So people are just picking the rares and uncommons, it looks like, which is kind of sad because we aren't getting too much information from these packs, especially when the commons are rather weak. Here we have Angelic Edict and Basilica Guards as probably the best commons. There's Syndicate Enforcer, Psychic Strike, and Ember Beast, which are all fine, but the more I've played with Gatecrash, the less I've been relying on Ember Beasts, because it's just the card that gives your opponent an opening to mess with your combat, and especially early tempo is so important in this format. Angelic Edict, similarly, is a bit too expensive for what it does. In a format dominated by 2-drops, you don't want to cast 5-mana sorcery removal spells. The Basilica Guards is the pick here for me. We do have 2 Orzhov cards and might be going Orzhov with what we started with, so picking up more exort creatures is always fine. And it looks like Orzhov might be the guild where we want to be in. Dutiful Thrall, Syndicate Enforcer, Basilica Guards, and Vizkopa Guildmage still in the pack. And Basilica Guards is better than the other commons. That's pretty easy. The question is if Vizkopa Guildmage is better than Basilica Guards. And clearly we can get Basilica Guards more easily than Vizkopa Guildmage, and Basilica Guards isn't even among the top commons in Orzhov, because there's cards like Syndic of Tithe, Basilica Screecher, and Kingpin's Pet, which is the best common in my opinion. I'm going to go with the Guildmage here. I don't want to send the signal that of a late Guildmage. I think that 2-drops are very important, and what makes all Guildmages great is that they can fight on turn 2, but they can also take over a game in the late game. And although Vizkopa Guildmage's abilities look a bit weaker than, let's say, those of Boros Guildmage, it's still very scary to play against when your opponent has 7 or 8 mana. Here there's a late Slaughterhorn, but I don't see how we could go into green from here on out after picking up white and white-black cards. So this isn't a card I'm really considering here, despite the Rampager. Dutiful Thrall, Armor Transport, and Court Street Denizen are probably the cards that are most likely to make my deck. I like Dutiful Thrall better than the 3-drops, and I like Armor Transport a little more than Court Street Denizen, but I'm really not a big fan of either of these cards. Although Armor Transport certainly has its uses, and so does the Denizen in aggressive Boros decks, maybe with Madcap skills, but we are looking to draft an Orzhov deck, and Dutiful Thrall just does a very good job in these kind of decks, especially when combined with Smite, which is a nice pickup here. 7th pick, Smite, nothing to complain about. Passing, nothing of interest. Shielded Passage is playable, right, gear as well, but Smite is a great card to have. This pack is more or less empty. Could pick up Horror of the Dim. I've seen people board in Guildscorn Ward, but I'm not convinced that that's a good idea. I'm assuming that Riot Gear should be the pick. We don't really need a 5-drop with an off-color activation, and Riot Gear is pretty nice on a lot of Orzhov's small creatures. Here, Nightwatch and Slate Street Ruffian are in the pack for us, with a late Spire Tracer, which is one of my pet cards, but of course not an option here. The Ruffian isn't amazing, but it is much cheaper than Nightwatch, and it works well with a couple of cards like Cypher cards. We are very defensive, so maybe the ability is relevant, but I think Nightwatch is overall just a little bit better than the Ruffian. Hopefully we won't have to play it, but it's still a nice pickup. We didn't have any 4 or 5 drops yet, so picking up Nightwatch, certainly not bad. Beckoning Apparition is a card I love to play. It trades favorably with a lot of creatures in the set. It's a nice trick to have. It enables Smite, it messes with your opponent's combat, and it triggers Extort very efficiently. So overall it's a great package. Also sometimes hitting something which in opponents' graveyards, or you can remove a creature in your own graveyard against black. So yeah, just a great package, and one of my favorite cards in the set, considering that it's a reprint but fits so well into the set. It's a nice gift in Shadow Slice, which we are definitely going to take. And let's hide the Rampager. That's not really happening. I'm not completely happy with the power level of our cards, but given that we decided on Syndic of Tithes rather than Burning Tree Emissary or Skynet Legionnaire, and then ended up in Orzhov, that's actually a good sign. Of course, somebody picked the Cartel Aristocrat, but there isn't really anything we can do about that. So now I'm just looking to draft the Extort deck, if possible, and hopefully we can get the most efficient build of that. Here we have Knight of Obligation, one of the premium Orzhov Extort uncommons. Apart from that, the pack is pretty empty. Corpse Blockade Might Wheel, which would be nice, and Simic gets some nice cards. Draken Craze is very good. Elusive Craze is not so much, but it's still, you always play it if you have it. So I'm hoping that the Corpse Blockade wields, and I've gotten a lot of comments on Glaring Spotlight. I think that in most games and most guilds, most archetypes, this card isn't worth including in your deck. Even though you get the ability to protect your creatures for 3 and make them unblockable, it's just not an effect I want to have sitting on the board, or to have to keep open mana for. I wouldn't say it's unplayable, but chances of me playing Glaring Spotlight are very, very low. So next time you're asking yourself why I'm not playing it, that's my reasoning. And here we have Righteous Charge competing with Viscopa Confessor, both better than Millennial Gargoyle in my opinion, with Viscopa Confessor fitting much better into our overall strategy. It is a 5-drop, but we do want to maximize Extort, and we don't really have an offensive plan that's supported by a Righteous Charge. And Millennial Gargoyle, while fine, isn't what we are looking for. so far we haven't seen the good Orzhov commons, so I have to assume that we aren't alone in drafting Orzhov, and in the worst case there is actually somebody to our left drafting Orzhov, but at this point there isn't much we can do about it, and we also don't have the cards, or haven't seen the cards that want us to go 3-color, go for a splash. For example, this Dimir Charm is fine, but I would much rather just pick the Gateway Shade and stick to 2 colors, hopefully picking up some Orzhov Guild Gates to make our 2-color decks even more our 2-color deck even more consistent, rather than branching out. I don't think that the power level of the cards we are seeing warrants a splash. Here there is the Confession, which can be quite nice, but you're also investing 5 mana without any board impact, so I try to stay away from cards like this. Corpse Blockade, I've talked about, is a card that we would like to have. Dutiful Thrall number 2 and Prophetic Prism are basically our options, I would say. And I'm not sure what I should pick here. A second Thrall is another low impact card, whereas Corpse Blockade is actually quite nice. Prophetic Prism was highlighted as an Orzhov card because you could extort of it and still draw a card, but I'd much rather have cards that actually impact the board, and I have a feeling that the Corpse Blockade might actually be better than the Thrall, but we also might wheel a Corpse Blockade, so yeah, this is a difficult pick. I'm going to go with Corpse Blockade because I want to diversify and not have too many Thralls in the end, but that could easily end up costing me. Here it's pretty easy to pick Gutter Skulk. We have a Corpse Blockade already. I don't think we want Smog Elemental at this point, and I've talked about Armor Transport. It's not the right card for this deck. Whereas a 2-mana 2/2 in this format is always great. That's an incredibly late Gorklan Rampager, which is much better than the other cards here. Navsquad Commandos would be the best card for us, but it's not even clear that it's better than Nightwatch, so I'm just going to hate draft this card. I don't know why it's still in the pack. Here it's Dimir Guildgate competing with Midnight Recovery. Alternatively, we could hate draft a Wojciech Halberdiers. I'm just going to go with Midnight Recovery. Cypher has some nice interactions with Extort, and that this card actually getting back a creature gives you a double Extort basically as well. So Dimir Guildgate would be nice with Gateway Shade and potential splashes, but currently I'm looking to actually get a deck together first. So yeah, let's focus on that. Going to take out the Flux Mage here because I'm more afraid of that than the other cards, although Keymaster Rogue is also pretty good. And this is the pack where there was a Corpse Blockade which didn't wheel, so I am going to take the Spotlight, but hopefully we won't have to main deck it. Here the pick is between Righteous Charge and Razor Tip Whip, with the Whip actually being quite nice in an Extort deck because you are usually ahead in the race, and that gives you a pretty nice card. But Righteous Charge is just so much more powerful. I think we can't really pick a Razor Tip Whip instead. Here I'm going to take Spire Tracer. I can't block it compared to Skinbank Goblin, where I have a lot of run force and not really a problem. Also, Blood Rush is not great against Orzhov. We have cards like Smite to punish it. Okay, we really need that third pack to deliver, but we did see the Orzhov signals in pack 1, which is why we are in Orzhov, so hopefully we can get some powerful Orzhov cards in this pack. Otherwise it's not looking too great. Here it's Kingpin's Pad versus Devour Flash, and the pick is very clearly Kingpin's Pad. It's the card that we want the most in this deck, and we have to compensate the lack of removal spells with trading, which isn't great with extort creatures, but it's going to be yeah, this is going to be the goal. Trade the creatures we don't need, keep the creatures we need, and win the race thanks to extort and so on. Next up, this is interesting. The rare is High Priest of Penance, which is always playable, but never truly amazing, in my experience. Two uncommons we already have one of, Viscorpa Confessor and Gateway Shade, and a lot of commons that don't really do all that much for us. Although I would actually like to play as a Ricci Tiger, I think it would be very good in this deck. So I kind of have my eyes on the Tiger, with the idea that we might pick one of the rarer cards and table the Tiger, and then we don't want the Gateway Shade. That's pretty easy. A second Confessor is also pushing it, although I like it a lot. In certain matchups, it's just an incredibly powerful effect. And if the board is stable and both players have no cards in hand, then you also want to draw your extort cards. Overall, the lack of removal, though, means that High Priest of Penance is probably the better choice, although I haven't been amazed by the High Priest, to be honest. I'm just hoping that it makes it difficult for our opponents to actually engage in combat, and that way this is going to prove worthwhile. Yeah, we have quite a lot of picks that aren't all that easy, I feel like, and this is another one where we have Thrall Parasite, an extort creature, but the lowest impact extort creature, because a 1/1 just doesn't stop most of the 2-drops in the format, and you don't actually want to trade with your extort creatures, but you'd love for them to be able to attack like Kingpin's Pet. I know that a lot of people are very big fans of Thrall Parasite, but I think it's significantly worse than all the 2 toughness extort creatures in Orzhov. So I'm actually going to go with Smite here. Our deck is lacking in removal, and that gives us 2 Smites and an Executioner's Swing, 3 cheap ways to deal with troublesome creatures, and we have ways to block, which is always important if you want to go for Smite. Here it's Dutiful Thrall competing for basically nothing. We can't support Dimir Keyron, we don't have a single gate, and we don't need a 5-drop. So Dutiful Thrall, I'll happily play 2 of them with 2 Smites and a lot of extort. This is another uninspiring pack. Dimir Guildgate, Back in Recovery, Midnight Recovery, Backing Apparition, and Aerial Maneuver. All not really amazing. I'm going to go with Backing Apparition, maybe only for the sideboard, but it is a 1/1 flying creature, and we do have 2 Smites. And I've already talked about some of the advantages of Backing Apparition. So even though there are situations where you want Aerial Maneuver more, I'm just too big of a fan of Backing Apparition. This is another difficult pick. Now, a 3rd Smite is pushing it, not really something that I really want. Cultural Aristocrat is absolutely amazing at times, and certainly better than Basilica Guards. Of course, there are the games where every single extort creature matters, and you want the Basilica Guards more than anything else, but Cultural Aristocrat just has an effect on the game that's much more than you would ever expect from a 2-mana 2/2, from an uncommon 2-mana 2/2. I'm playing against Cultural Aristocrat is a pain, and I would love to have it in this deck, which is why I think it's more important than a 2nd Basilica Guards or a 3rd Smite. And let's hope that proves correct. Here, Devour Flesh is easily the best choice for us. Armor Transport is much weaker, and a turn 2 Devour Flesh is basically a premium 2-drop, and later on in the game you can engineer the board state to your advantage, or gain some life, which is sometimes enough. This is a rather late Assault Griffin, but it's understandable why we can get it at 8th pick. It's just nothing that either guild wants desperately, so getting this 8th is not a sign in any way, but it's a great pickup for us because we wanted some more 4-drops. Here, Shattering Blow is the card that we could play, although there aren't too many artifacts I'm afraid of. Hands of Binding and Simic Keyron are probably the cards that we don't want to face, and Hands of Binding might be troublesome, so let's take that out. Viscopa Confessor tabled, and I'm pretty sure that I'm just going to play both of them, and that makes me quite happy. Zarichi Tiger also wheeling is... I have a feeling that the Tiger is going to be crucial to our deck and our overall plan. Could have taken Way of the Thief here, because once a creature is unblockable, it's kind of difficult for me to smite it. So, and by that I mean it's impossible. So, yeah, maybe taking the card that devalues my removal spell would have been the better choice. But overall, this didn't go amazingly well, but I think we did get a sufficient amount of good cards, even though we would love to have more Extort and more removal spells, or, well, our removal spells to be a little less situational, but I still think that we can make a great deck out of the cards that we picked. And of course, I've said that before. The main idea of Orzhov is that because of Extort, cheap cards just gain utility, and expensive cards are worse than they look like. If you have 1 or 2 Extort cards in your in play, then it's just not worth it to spend more mana rather than playing a cheap creature or a cheap spell and getting the additional Extort triggers. So this is what it's looking like currently. We have 15 creatures and 2 backing apparitions if we want to play both of them, and I have a feeling that we do want to play both of them. So we actually have at least 2 more slots. We could consider playing 16 lands, but we do have a lot of Extort, and there's really no reason. With our late game also not looking too bad, we have 3 4-drops that actually have a pretty high impact on the game, and that's the important part about the Tiger. If it stays in play, it has a very high impact, even though it's only a 2, 3, 4, 4. And those creatures, the 2 Confessors, also do a very good job of making sure that we are somewhat favored when the game goes longer, because of their combined abilities. If you drop it early, then you take the strongest cards from their hand, basically getting a 2-for-1. And Extort creatures are also fine in the late game, even though it is only a 1/3. So, looking at the cards that we have here and how our mana base is going to look like, we already see that we have a little more white in our deck, or let's say it's a high amount of white cards compared to the black. We do have the black activation on Dutiful Thrall, but that's about it. So we would want to play a 10-7 or 9-8 mana base, with black, of course, still being very important because we do want to cast our spells. On the other hand, if you look at it like this, the left side is the cards we can play with white only. Then in the middle we have some that are only castable with white and black, and we have only 3 cards that we can play if we have only swamps. So a hand with no plains is unkeepable for us, which means that it might be better to just go for 10-7, and then if we have a starting hand of only plains, we just keep it anyway and hope to draw into one of the swamps. Realistically, I would love to have a Guildgate in this pile, because then we would be able to reduce these situations by quite a bit. Now, let's get back to the remaining 2 cards here. And my main question here is, how do I want to win the game? Do I just play control with a little bit of Extort triggers and attacks for 2 in between, or do I want to turn over the game at some point and then just attack more efficiently than my opponent. So for example, with a card like Shadow Slice, Righteous Charge, which is quite nice with backing apparition. Maybe I just want the Night Watch. Maybe I just want the 2/2 Night tokens, but that would be more of a control card actually, because it just trades favorably and gives me more blockers to use with Smite, and to trade with, basically trade with 2 cheaper creatures of my opponent. Overall, I think that this deck wants to play a somewhat controlling game, but has to make sure that we have at least one creature in play at all times that does something worthwhile. It's worth noticing that Midnight Recovery is very, very good with Cartel Aristocrat, and I've already talked about the advantages it has with Extort, but overall it's just not an amazing card, and we don't quite have the evasion in our deck to make it great. So looking at it that way, I think that those cards on the left are probably not what we should be playing, and this is the Gateway Shade can't really be supported because we do not want to play a lot of swamps, and if we go 10-7, then playing a Gateway Shade is just not what we want to be doing. Gateway Shade, I would want either a lot of Guild Gates, or some Guild Gates at least, and then 9 swamps, maybe even 10 swamps. So Righteous Charge and Shadow Slice serve a similar role, while Riot Gear is a cheap play in the early game, but then helps us to make one of our creatures larger, which doesn't sound like much, but if you can make Dutiful Thrall a 2/3, or if you can make a 2/3 flyer with the help of Back and Apparition, that's actually pretty good. And overall, I just don't see this deck being too aggressive. We have the backing apparitions, but those are in the deck. If they can attack for 1, it's great, but if we have to be defensive, we want to be smiting, we want to be blocking, we want to be trading, and we want to stall the ground and the air. So I don't see this deck being very aggressive, which means that Righteous Charge and Shadow Slice are probably just not what this deck wants. Which is kind of sad. I like the temple plays, but a card like Viscopa Confessor, Basilica Guards, Corpse Blockade, and cards like Righteous Charge and Shadow Slice just don't mix very well. I'm going to go with Night Watch as an additional way to gain a little bit of card advantage, but also have a little more staying power in the late game. And then I'm going to include Riot Gear as a way to make my flyers more beefy, my regenerators more threatening, and well, maybe just create a creature that can attack without trading with my opponent. So yeah, this is going to be a test for Riot Gear. Who knows how good it will be. And now we have to go back to deciding how many lands of each color to play. The argument that we can't ever keep a hand without plains means that I'm going to go for 10-7, and then we have to hope to see a swamp, but we do know that a single swamp is something we can work with, even though it's kind of awkward with the Dutiful Thralls, which I'm aware of, but I want to maximize the amount of keepable hands in this deck, and that means 10-7, which Magic Online agrees with, and I hope that works out. See you in round 1.